October 2025. The Saudi maternity hospital had survived 500 days of siege. It was the last functioning medical facility in a city of nearly 500,000 people. Doctors performed surgeries by candlelight. Mothers gave birth in hallways. Children with bullet wounds waited for births that would never come. Then, on October 26th, the Rapid Support Forces broke through the city's final defenses. What happened next was systematic. RSF fighters moved through the hospital, room by room. Patients were shot in their beds. Mothers clutching newborns were killed where they stood. Doctors trying to shield their patients were executed. And those who tried to flee were hunted in the streets.
Hundreds of bodies piled on top of each other inside Sudan's only health facility in the city of Al Fashir.
By the time the sun set, nearly 500 people lay dead. WHO warned of mass atrocities and a descent into an even darker hell. Satellite imagery captured what witnesses couldn't bear to describe. Objects consistent with human bodies, lying in neat rows outside the hospital entrance. The sick, the wounded, the dying, all of them killed in a single afternoon. But this wasn't random violence. This was the culmination of a war that had already killed over 150,000 people and displaced 12 million more. A war that transformed Sudan, Africa's third largest nation, into the world's largest humanitarian catastrophe. And behind it all stands the Rapid Support Forces, a paramilitary group that evolved from the notorious Janjaweed militias responsible for the Darfur genocide. But they are not alone in this. They had help. Thanks to multiple investigations, we can trace the weapons they used, the drones that bombed the city, the artillery that shattered its walls, the bullets that killed those patients. To really understand who is responsible for what happened in El Fasher, you need to follow those weapons back to their source, and that trail leads somewhere most people would never expect. It leads to a glass tower in Abu Dhabi, to a man worth 17 billion pounds, to someone the world knows as the owner of Manchester City Football Club. His name is Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, and he has been called the handler of the UAE's secret foreign wars. This is the story of how a football club owner became a warlord's bestie, and how the UAE's money and weapons enabled one of the worst humanitarian catastrophes of the 21st century. To understand what is happening in Sudan right now, I need to show you a map. Take a look at this. The country is currently divided between RSF fighters, the Sudanese armed forces, and other militias and rebel groups. Sudan is burning. It's been burning since April 15, 2023, when fighting erupted in Khartoum between two rival military factions. On one side, the Sudanese armed forces, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. On the other, the Rapid Support Forces, commanded by this guy, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagolo, better known as Hemeti. What started as a power struggle in the capital has spread into total war. About 150,000 people have been reported killed, though the real number is likely far higher. More than 12 million people, over a quarter of Sudan's population, have been forced from their homes. We have over 30 million people facing acute food insecurity. Famine has been confirmed in displacement camps across Darfur. Khartoum, a city of 6 million people, now stands in ruin. Government buildings destroyed, banks looted. The international airport's runway looks like a graveyard of wrecked aircraft. At least half the population has fled the country. The country is effectively split. The Sudanese armed forces control most of northern and eastern Sudan. General Burhan run what is recognized internationally as Sudan's government from Port Sudan. After Khartoum became too dangerous, the Rapid Support Forces control virtually all of western Sudan, specifically Darfur, the vast region bordering Chad, Libya, and the Central African Republic. After the fall of El Fasher in October 2025, the RSF now dominates every major city in Darfur. But who are these guys? I mean, the RSF, and why are they fighting? To answer that question, you need to go back 2 decades, to 2003, when Darfur erupted in violence.
For too long, the people of Darfur have suffered at the hands of a government that is complicit in the bombing, murder, and rape of innocent civilians.
Rebel groups rose up against Sudan's government, protesting years of marginalization. Sudan's dictator, Omar al-Bashir, responded by arming Arab militias from nomadic tribes. They were called the Janjaweed, a word that roughly translates to devils on horseback.
Khartoum's forces, aided by local Arab militias known as the Janjaweed, launched a campaign that destroyed entire villages.
We made a whole documentary about their evolution. I'll leave a link so you can check it out. The Janjaweed carried out what the world would recognize as genocide. Between 2003 and 2008, they killed an estimated 300,000 civilians. They displaced 2.5 million people, and they systematically burned villages. They massacred civilians. They used rape as a weapon of war. They targeted non-Arab ethnic groups, that is the Four, the Masalit, and the Zagawa. The International Criminal Court eventually indicted Omar al-Bashir for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. But his commanders were left unscathed. One of those young Janjaweed commanders was this guy, Mohammed Hamdan Dagolo, known as Hemeti. He was born into the Rezigat tribe. He worked as a camel trader with minimal education. He left school in 3rd grade in fact, but he proved himself as a ruthless commander during the genocide. Well, in 2013, Bashir made a decision that would change Sudan forever. He formalized the Janjaweed into a new paramilitary force, the Rapid Support Forces. He put Hemeti in command. The RSF became Bashir's personal guard. They crushed rebellions, they protected his regime. By 2019, they numbered about 100,000 fighters. But they weren't just soldiers now. They were a business empire. You see, in 2017, Hemeti and the RSF forcibly took the Jebel Ahmed gold mines in Darfur, some of the richest deposits in Africa. His company, Al Junaid, soon dominated Sudan's gold industry. That gold generated hundreds of millions of dollars annually. Much of it was smuggled to Dubai. This made the RSF financially independent. They could now buy their own weapons, pay salaries even better than the regular army. They became what analysts called a state within a state. When popular protests forced Bashir from power in April 2019, Hemeti threw away his loyalty cap and helped overthrow him. He and General Buran, the army chief, formed an uneasy partnership. In fact, they jointly staged a coup in October 2021, sidelining the civilian government that was supposed to lead Sudan's transition into a democratic government. But tensions were building. The army wanted to integrate the RSF into the regular military. Hemeti refused any integration that would weaken his power or threaten his gold empire. By April 2023, mistrust exploded into open warfare. And here's the thing. A desert militia shouldn't be able to sustain a 2-year war against a national army. The RSF doesn't have aircraft factories. They don't manufacture drones. They don't produce artillery shells. So, the question is, how have they fought the Sudanese armed forces to a stalemate? Well, the answer lies in what they are buying and who is selling to them.
A BBC News Arabic investigation has documented the Sudanese army's use of at least 2 types of Iranian drones in its deadly war against the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF.
The evidence started emerging slowly. Then it became overwhelming. In April 2025, UN investigators found and examined mortar rounds in North Darfur. Among the equipment were standard military ordnance. But here's what made these shells interesting. They had serial numbers. And when investigators began tracing those serial numbers, the trail led back here to Bulgaria. Bulgaria confirmed they had manufactured and shipped those exact shells, but not to Sudan. The recipient country was 1,800 miles away from Sudan, somewhere in the Middle East. Yeah, the United Arab Emirates. Allegedly, they got those deliveries in 2019. So how come the weapons are now in Sudan? Bulgaria's government stated clearly that they had granted no authorization for re-export to Sudan. They had issued no licenses for defense products destined for Sudan. Well, this is then troubling. someone had taken weapons purchased by the UAE and sent them into Sudan's war zone. But this wasn't an isolated incident. In May 2025, Amnesty International published an investigation documenting sophisticated Chinese weaponry captured from the RSF in Khartoum and Darfur, manufactured by Norinco, a Chinese state-owned defense corporation. These bombs had never been used in combat anywhere in the world until Sudan. They were recently manufactured. And Amnesty's experts concluded that they were almost certainly re-exported to Sudan by the UAE government. British-made weapons components, targeting systems from a Wales-based company called Militech, armored vehicles from Emirati defense contractor Edge, engines marked Made in Great Britain by Cummins Inc., all found in former RSF bases in Khartoum and Omdurman. The pattern was undeniable. Advanced weapons were flowing to the RSF through Emirati channels. US intelligence agencies tracked this flow throughout 2024 and 2025. According to reports from the Defense Intelligence Agency and the State Department's Intelligence Bureau, weapons transfer from the UAE to the RSF increased significantly. Sophisticated Chinese-made drones, small arms, heavy machine guns, vehicles, artillery, mortars, ammunition. But how? How does an arms pipeline operate on this scale? Well, the answer lies in a remote town most people have never heard of. Amjaras, Chad, a dusty border settlement near Sudan's western frontier. In mid-2023, something changed in Amjaras. The town transformed overnight. An airbase that had been quiet suddenly became one of the busiest airports in the region. Cargo planes, massive Lushin 76X began arriving from the United Arab Emirates, sometimes via stops in Entebbe, Uganda, sometimes via Rwanda. The UAE said these flights carried humanitarian aid. In fact, they established a field hospital in Amjaras, run by two charities controlled by this guy, Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, ostensibly to treat Sudanese refugees fleeing the war. On paper, this looked noble. Humanitarian assistance for displaced people. How kind! But witnesses in Amjaras told a different story. They described cargo planes arriving at night, not during the day when aid deliveries might be expected. At night, they watched as trucks were loaded in darkness. Convoys of pickup trucks, Toyotas, the RSF preferred technicals. And these were escorted by armed fighters. These convoys would drive east toward the Sudanese border. Flight tracking data captured the scale of the operation before the tracking account was mysteriously deactivated. 109 cargo flights from the UAE to Amjaras. All were documented, logged, recorded. The New York Times investigated and confirmed not only arms deliveries to Amjaras, but that a drone system had been established on the airfield. Drones that were subsequently used in attacks on El Fasher originated from this humanitarian base. The RSF's battlefield capabilities changed dramatically after these deliveries began. A militia that previously had little ability to contest the Sudanese army's air superiority suddenly began shooting down military aircraft, man-portable air defense systems, man-pads. The RSF had never fielded these at scale before. They began using armed drones to strike army positions, sophisticated combat UAVs that required training, maintenance, and specialized expertise to operate. Multiple rocket launchers appeared in RSF arsenals, howitzers, heavy weaponry the RSF couldn't manufacture and couldn't have obtained through desert smuggling routes. A UN panel of experts concluded in late 2023 that the RSF's new warfighting capacity came from sustained large-scale supplies of weapons via the UAE-Chad corridor. Well, when confronted, UAE officials flatly denied involvement. They insisted all flights carried only humanitarian aid. They said they complied with UN resolutions. They called all those accusations propaganda orchestrated by, quote, the Sudanese armed forces. But the evidence kept mounting, and there was another flow, not just weapons going into Sudan now, but something coming out of Sudan. Yeah, gold. The UAE is the largest buyer of Sudanese gold. Before the war, they purchased roughly 90% of Sudan's legal gold exports. But here's the thing about Sudan's gold. An estimated 75% of production is smuggled out of the country, not sold through official channels. Smuggled. And the primary destination for that smuggled gold, you guessed right, Dubai. In the first half of 2025 alone, the UAE imported approximately 90% of Sudan's legal gold exports, about 8.8 tons, generating close to $840 million. But reports indicated that smuggled gold exceeded official exports by a factor of 4. This creates a perfect loop. The RSF controls gold mines in Darfur. They smuggle gold to Dubai, where it is converted to cash through local trading and jewelry businesses. That cash then helps buy weapons. Those weapons sustain the war. The war secures the gold mines. The cycle continues. Leaked bank records from 2019 showed the RSF maintained accounts at Abu Dhabi's First Bank. Money flowed through a front company called Tradive General Trading LLC, registered in the UAE. Millions of dollars moved through these channels. In January 2024, the US Treasury Department sanctioned 7 UAE companies, accusing them of supplying arms, financing, and other support to the RSF. The question isn't whether weapons and money flow between the UAE and the RSF. The evidence for that is overwhelming. The question now is, who is coordinating this effort? Who is making the phone calls? Who is arranging the flights? Who is managing this elaborate covert operation? The answer came from US intelligence intercepts in mid-2024, and it pointed to one man. Most people in the West know this man, Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, for one thing. Yeah, he owns Manchester City Football Club. In September 2008, his Abu Dhabi United Group purchased the club for around £210 million. What followed was the transformation of English football, like nothing we have ever seen before. The club's first title in 44 years. They have won 6 more since then, now holding 7 Premier League titles. They also have the Champions League trophy, which they won in 2023. Manchester City became one of the most successful and valuable football clubs on earth, all thanks to this man. Sheikh Mansour expanded his empire through the City Football Group to include New York City FC, Melbourne City FC, Mumbai City FC, stakes in clubs worldwide. In 2024, his team won approval to build a $780 million soccer stadium in Queens, the first such stadium in New York City. He's reportedly worth an estimated £17 billion personally. But when you look at his family, that is where this story really begins. The Al Nahyan ruling family of Abu Dhabi controls approximately £300 billion in wealth. He chairs 2 UAE sovereign wealth funds and sits on the board of a third. He controls investment vehicles with hundreds of billions of dollars in assets. He owns super yachts, race horses, real estate all across the globe. This is the Sheikh Mansour the public knows, the wealthy benefactor, the sports patron, the man who brought glory to Manchester. And he is the Vice President and Deputy Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates. But here's something most people don't know about Sheikh Mansour. In 17 years of owning Manchester City, he has attended only 2 matches, once at the Etihad Stadium, once elsewhere. That's it. For a man who spent over £1.5 billion building one of football's great dynasties, he's remarkably absent from the spotlight. Former diplomats describe him as having, quote, a chameleon-like ability to disappear into the background. Well, it appears this absence isn't accidental, because Sheikh Mansour has another role, one that doesn't appear on glossy football club websites or in stadium announcements. You see, in June 2025, the New York Times published a major investigation that changed how the world sees Sheikh Mansour. This investigation was based on something most powerful people fear: intercepted communications. US intelligence agencies had intercepted regular phone calls between Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan and RSF commander Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. Not occasional calls now, regular coordination throughout the war. More than a dozen US, African, and Arab officials told the Times that Sheikh Mansour was leading what they described as an aggressive campaign by the UAE to expand its influence across Africa and the Middle East. Jeffrey Feltman, former US envoy to the Horn of Africa, stated, quote, "We always knew Mansour was the one working behind the scenes in Sudan." And then we have Andrew P. Miller, a former senior US diplomat. He was even more direct. He called Sheikh Mansour the fixer, the handler, the one sent to places without much glamour or publicity, but which are important to the Emiratis. The investigation further revealed a timeline that makes the relationship crystal clear. February 2023, just weeks before Sudan's civil war erupted, Sheikh Mansour had hosted Hemeti at his Persian Gulf Palace. But this wasn't their first meeting. Mansour had previously entertained Hemeti at a UAE arms fair where they toured exhibits of rockets and drones. Two powerful men walking through displays of weaponry, discussing possibilities. April 15, 2023, the war begins in Khartoum. Within days, Hemeti was granted safe haven in Abu Dhabi. He stayed in a secure residence where he recorded video messages to his supporters back in Sudan. So, while his fighters battled in Khartoum streets, their commander was protected in an Emirati compound. Shortly after, the UAE launched the covert operation to arm RSF fighters. The air bridge to arm Jarrah's Chad, the humanitarian field hospital that doubled as a weapons depot. The operation was sophisticated, coordinated, and systematic. And according to US and UN officials, this humanitarian effort served as cover for secret Emirati operation to smuggle drones and powerful weapons to Hemeti's RSF. And most telling of all this is that the charities running those hospitals are allegedly controlled by Sheikh Mansour. In 2024, US Special Envoy to Sudan, Tom Perillo, traveled to the Emirates specifically to confront Sheikh Mansour. In a direct meeting, Perillo presented evidence of UAE support for the RSF. He asked Mansour to stop. According to a US official present, Sheikh Mansour deflected. He reportedly blamed adversaries. He claimed others were obstructing peace in Sudan. And after this, the phone calls with Hemeti continued. Now, this is Sheikh Mansour's method of operation, repeated across multiple conflicts. First, he cultivates personal relationships with strong men and warlords. There are face-to-face meetings, hospitality at palaces, tours of arms exhibitions. He makes them feel like partners, not proxies. Second, he coordinates military and financial support through complex networks. There are state-owned enterprises involved, front companies, charitable organizations. The UAE's formal financial system processes the transactions, but the structures provide plausible deniability. And then third, he leverages the UAE's procurement capabilities and sovereign wealth to supply weapons, ammunition, and equipment. The UAE purchases from manufacturers legitimately, but those weapons find their way to conflict zones through re-export, often in violation of UN embargoes. And fourthly, he arranges medical treatment for wounded fighters. UAE military hospitals in Abu Dhabi have reportedly treated injured RSF combatants, airlifted from Sudan for care unavailable in the war zone. And the next step is he provides safe haven when needed. When things get dangerous, UAE territory becomes a refuge. Hemeti wasn't the first warlord to find sanctuary in Abu Dhabi, and he won't be the last. And finally, Sheikh Mansour uses soft power investments, football clubs, real estate, technology ventures, all used to build international legitimacy that deflects scrutiny from these shadowy operations. Who would suspect the man who transformed Manchester City of coordinating arms shipments to genocidal militias? This is the real Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, not just the football club owner, the handler, the coordinator of the UAE's covert foreign wars. And Sudan is just one theater in a much larger operation.
Everyone knows that the Abu Dhabi regime continues to play the worst role in Sudan by equipping the RSF with armament and other resources aiming to continue the war.
Sheikh Mansour didn't start coordinating proxy wars with Sudan. He has been doing this for over a decade. And the pattern, once you see it, is unmistakable. Let's go to Libya between 2014 and 2020. When Libya collapsed into civil war after Gaddafi's fall, the UAE threw its support behind this guy, General Khalifa Haftar, a warlord controlling eastern Libya. The UAE supplied Haftar with drones, conducted airstrikes using Emirati aircraft, and provided weapons despite a UN arms embargo. Chinese-made drones operated by UAE personnel bombed Haftar's enemies in Tripoli. Emirati Air Force planes struck targets across Libya. Advanced Russian-designed Pantsir air defense systems appeared in Haftar's arsenal. Systems so expensive and sophisticated that a UN report concluded, quote, "It is very unlikely that any Libyan party acquired it. Instead, it is more likely that the United Arab Emirates provided it." In 2019, when Haftar launched his offensive to capture Tripoli, the UAE conducted hundreds of drone strikes on his behalf. They supplied weapons and jet fuel, and according to US intelligence, the UAE allegedly underwrote parts of Russia's Wagner Group intervention in Libya, that is potentially funneling payments to the mercenary company. Sheikh Mansour managed the financial logistics. American-made Javelin missiles originally sold to the UAE were found in a rebel base in 2019. They had been diverted to Libya. When confronted, the UAE had to quietly admit those weapons were theirs. Sheikh Mansour's team had to smooth over the diplomatic embarrassment. But what was the motivation behind all of this? According to the UAE, General Haftar positioned himself as a bulwark against Islamist influence, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood. For the UAE's leadership, crushing Islamist movements is a core strategic objective. Haftar served that purpose well. And then there is Yemen, an operation that started in 2015 and continues to this day. When Saudi Arabia launched its intervention against Houthi rebels in Yemen, the UAE joined as a full partner. But while the Saudis focused on pushing Houthis out of northern Yemen, the UAE pursued distinct objectives in the south. The government in Abu Dhabi deployed significant military forces to Yemen and built up local proxy militias, particularly the Southern Transitional Council. This was a secessionist group seeking to carve out an independent South Yemen. They armed these militias with heavy weapons, armored vehicles, and training. In fact, the UAE hired mercenaries from across the world. There were Colombians and, of course, Sudanese fighters from Hemeti's RSF, thousands of them paid for by Emirati money. These mercenaries fought the UAE's battles so Emirati citizens wouldn't have to. In 2019, the UAE announced a withdrawal of its troops from Yemen, but this was deceptive. The proxy forces remained, armed and funded by Abu Dhabi. The war became a shadow operation. UAE influence maintained through local warlords who controlled ports and coastlines crucial to Gulf shipping lanes. Reports later emerged of secret detention facilities in southern Yemen where prisoners were tortured. Well, the UAE denied involvement, but human rights organizations documented these sites. How about Ethiopia? When Ethiopia's government fought Tigray forces in the north, it initially struggled. Then, suddenly, armed drones appeared over the battlefield. Chinese-made combat UAVs operated from the UAE's military base in Eritrea. These drones struck Tigray positions and helped turn the tide in favor of Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's government. The intervention was brief, a few months of intensive drone support, but this was decisive. The UAE supplied the capability that changed the war's trajectory. Why? MBZ had cultivated a personal relationship with Abiy Ahmed. The UAE had investments in Ethiopian industries, and crucially, the UAE opposes armed rebellions that, quote, threatened established governments, especially when those armed rebellions are not funded by the UAE themselves. The pattern across all these conflicts reveals a coherent strategy. The UAE supports authoritarian strongmen and warlords who position themselves against Islamist movements, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood. It provides military assistance, that is, drones, weapons, ammunition, logistical support, often in violation of international arms embargoes. It also uses proxy forces and mercenaries rather than large-scale UAE troop deployments. minimizing direct casualties and domestic political risks. It establishes military bases and logistic hubs that create long-term strategic presence from Eritrea to Somaliland to Chad. The UAE has built a network of facilities spanning from the Red Sea to the Sahel region. It makes economic investments, particularly in ports, mining and agriculture, that provide material interests worth protecting through these military operations. It also conducts sophisticated public relations and diplomatic efforts to maintain plausible deniability, all while shaping international perceptions. And it demonstrates a willingness to breach international law and norms when convenient to UAE interests. The UAE seeks influence without governance, power without accountability. They want to shape outcomes in conflict zones across Africa and the Middle East without the burden of direct military occupation or the scrutiny that comes with conventional warfare. The geographic scope is staggering. From Libya in North Africa to Yemen in the Arabian Peninsula, from the Horn of Africa to the Sahel, the UAE has inserted itself into conflicts and power struggles across a vast area, thereby establishing client relationships with warlords and strongmen from Tripoli to Khartoum. And at the center of coordinating many of these operations sits Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the handler, the fixer, the man who can authorize a $100 million weapons shipment in one phone call and approve a $780 million football stadium in the next. But the human cost of these interventions has been catastrophic. The conflicts in Libya, Yemen, Sudan, and Ethiopia have collectively killed hundreds of thousands of people and displaced millions more. The forces backed by the UAE have been repeatedly accused of war crimes, indiscriminate attacks on civilians, torture and extrajudicial killings, sexual violence, and obstruction of humanitarian assistance. Yet, the United Arab Emirates has faced limited accountability. Economic ties with Western powers protect Abu Dhabi from serious consequences. Arms sales from European and American companies continue all the same. The UN Security Council has proven unable or unwilling to enforce embargoes or impose meaningful sanctions on this country. This impunity has only encouraged the UAE to expand its interventionist strategy. Rather than scaling back in response to international criticism, support for the RSF in Sudan intensified even as evidence of atrocities mounted. Which brings us to the end game. You see, Sudan's war isn't just about who controls Khartoum or Darfur. It is about something much larger. The question of whether Sudan itself survives as a unified nation. Sudan, as we say it, is already split. Not officially, not on any map you will see, but in practice, it might as well be two separate countries right now. The Sudanese armed forces control northern and eastern Sudan. The Rapid Support Forces, meanwhile, control virtually all of Western Sudan, territories bordering Chad, Libya, and the Central African Republic. And in August 2025, the RSF made this division clear. In a ceremony in Nyala, South Darfur, Hemeti took an oath of office as head of what the RSF called the Government of Peace and Unity. A 13-member presidential council was sworn in, ministers were appointed, a parallel government structure was established. The internationally recognized government in Port Sudan dismissed this as an artificial construct, an illegitimate entity. The African Union rejected it. The United Nations warned it had serious consequences on the peace efforts and the existential future of the country. But here's the reality. Sudan now has two rival administrations. Each controls distinct territory. Each claims authority over all of Sudan. Each is backed by different foreign powers, and each shows no sign of compromise. This raises a critical question. What happens if Sudan formally splits? And more importantly, who benefits? Let's start with the obvious winner, Hemeti and the Rapid Support Forces. If the RSF consolidates control over Western Sudan as a separate state or autonomous region, they achieve everything they are fighting for. They don't have to surrender to Khartoum. They don't have to integrate into the national army. They don't have to give up their weapons or face justice for atrocities committed during the war. And most importantly, they get to keep the gold. The RSF now controls most of Sudan's major gold mining areas, including the Jebel Ama mines that generate hundreds of millions of dollars annually. A separate RSF-controlled entity means those resources remain exclusively theirs. No sharing with a national government. No oversight from democratic institutions. Complete control. For Hemeti personally, it means he becomes a head of state rather than a wanted war criminal. He would gain international legitimacy instead of an ICC indictment. He would have control of a resource-rich territory instead of exile or prison. But Hemeti isn't the only winner if Sudan splits. We have the United Arab Emirates. They stand to gain enormously as well. An RSF-controlled Western Sudan would be a client state beholden to Abu Dhabi. After investing billions in weapons, logistics, and political support, the UAE would have a dependent government controlling vast gold deposits. What is currently seen as an illegal smuggling operation, conflict gold flowing from Darfur to Dubai, could be formalized into a legitimate trade agreement. The UAE could negotiate favorable mining concessions. They would even have exclusive export rights, infrastructure development contracts, all the benefits of neo-colonial resource extraction without the criticism that comes with direct occupation. Strategically, an RSF-held Darfur provides the UAE with a foothold in the Sahel region, that vast band of territory across Africa where instability creates opportunities for external powers to gain influence. The UAE could establish a military presence, build air bases, position itself as the dominant external power in Western Sudan. And the precedent matters. If the UAE successfully helps carve out a client state from Sudan, it validates their entire proxy warfare strategy. It proves that with enough money and weapons, you can reshape African borders to serve Gulf interests. Other warlords in other conflicts will see this and know that the UAE rewards those who serve its strategic objectives. Libya's Khalifa Haftar benefits too. An RSF-controlled entity on Libya's southeastern border means a friendly government for him, shared tribal connections, coordination against mutual enemies. The border between Libya and Western Sudan could become a corridor for arms trafficking, smuggling, and movement of fighters. What's currently seen as illegal cross-border activity could become official cooperation between aligned regimes. But not everyone wins if Sudan splits. Egypt loses, for example. Cairo has backed the Sudanese armed forces and views Buran as a more reliable partner than Hemeti. Egypt's primary concern include control over Nile River waters, preventing refugee flows into Egypt, and blocking Turkish and Qatari influence in Sudan. A partition that leaves the SAF in control only of northern and eastern Sudan might serve some Egyptian interest. Cairo would maintain a friendly government controlling the crucial Nile Valley, but Egypt would lose influence over Western Sudan entirely. The potential for continued instability, refugee flows, and spillover violence would persist. Western powers face difficult calculations. The United States, United Kingdom, and European Union have formally supported Sudan's unity and opposed the parallel government. But some Western analysts acknowledge that partition might be preferable to indefinite war if it could bring stability and allow humanitarian access. The Trump administration announced an approach to Sudan in early 2025 that appeared to incorporate it into a larger regional peace framework. But whether this accepts partition as an outcome or insists on maintaining unity remains unclear. For ordinary Sudanese, partition would bring mixed consequences at best. If partition ended the fighting, that would provide immediate relief from violence and civilian casualties. Humanitarian aid could finally reach populations cut off by the war. People could begin rebuilding shattered lives. Until another warlord decides he wants his own partition, and then we are back at it all over again. Another thing to note here is that partition would establish military rule on both sides. any hope for democratic transition will be deferred indefinitely. Partition would likely lead to population transfers. We may have ethnic cleansing, families and communities fragmented, economic relationships disrupted, and of course there will be new border disputes and sources of conflict created. And for Darfuris specifically, the people who have suffered most in this war, living under RSF control means being governed by the forces that committed mass atrocities against their communities. The same fighters who carried out the Darfur genocide in 2003. The same forces that massacred patients in El Fasher Hospital. The international community officially opposes partition, but the AU and UN have limited ability to prevent it if both the SAF and RSF, backed by their foreign patrons, pursued separation. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Partition could occur in reality without formal recognition. If the current territorial division persists for years, with competing governments each controlling distinct regions, Sudan is partitioned in practice regardless of what international law says. It would be like Somalia, where Somaliland has functioned as a separate entity for decades despite lacking international recognition. They would have different governments, different territory, different reality on the ground. The most likely beneficiaries of partition are the military leaders themselves, Boran and Hemeti, along with their foreign backers, while the greatest losers would be the ordinary Sudanese. Their country fragmented forever, their aspirations for democracy deferred indefinitely, their suffering prolonged by the entrenchment of military rule. Which brings us to the final question. What happens now? Can anyone stop this? Can the UAE be held accountable? Can Sheikh Mansour face consequences for his role in one of the century's worst humanitarian catastrophe?
It is an absurdity that one of the warring parties can carry on politicizing this forum by disseminating false and baseless allegations.
The same week that UN officials described El Fasher as descending into an even darker hell, Manchester City was playing matches in the Premier League, fans celebrating goals, commentators discussing tactics, the machine of elite football grinding on as if nothing else mattered. The contradiction is of course jarring, but it is also revealing. As of late 2025, the war in Sudan continues. The RSF still controls all of Darfur. Their parallel government in Nyala claims authority over Western Sudan. Their fighters man checkpoints on every road. Their commanders extract tribute from every transaction. The Sudanese armed forces still control the north and east. General Boran operates from Port Sudan, leading what the international community recognizes as Sudan's legitimate government. His forces conduct airstrikes on RSF positions. The war grinds on, and the weapons, of course, they are still flowing. You can track the RSF's evolving capabilities on the battlefield and know someone is still arming them. Gold is still flowing out of Darfur to Dubai. The smuggling networks haven't been disrupted. The front companies in Dubai still operate. The financial loop that turns gold into weapons and weapons into territorial control, it continues. In Manchester, fans still fill the Etihad Stadium. Manchester City continues competing for trophies. The City Football Group continues expanding globally. But here's what is impossible to ignore anymore: the contradiction. On one hand, there is the public Sheikh Mansour, the transformative football club owner who elevated Manchester City to unprecedented success. The wealthy investor supporting community programs, the cultural benefactor whose investments bring prestige and economic benefits. On the other hand, there is the private Sheikh Mansour, the handler who coordinates arms shipments to militias accused of genocide, the fixer who maintains relationship with warlords wanted for war crimes, the strategic coordinator who helps enable the world's worst humanitarian catastrophes. These aren't two different people. They are the same man, the same money. You can't separate them. The glamorous investment in Western sport and culture provide cover for shadow operations in conflict zones. The UAE, under this guy, MBZ, and Sheikh Mansour, has developed a model of power projection. Use wealth to arm proxies, use proxies to gain influence, use influence to extract resources, and then use these resources to accumulate more wealth, and use that wealth to build soft power through sports, through cultural investments, through economic integration, which creates a system that insulates from consequences. It worked in Libya, it worked in Yemen, and it is working now in Sudan. And if the international community allows Sudan to be violently partitioned through proxy warfare without serious consequences, it signals that this model is acceptable, that systematic support for genocide carries manageable cost, that as long as you are rich enough and economically integrated enough, you can help tear apart entire countries and face nothing more than diplomatic criticism. The future of proxy warfare might look a lot like Sudan. Not state against state anymore. Not armies in uniform fighting according to Geneva Conventions, but militias armed by foreign powers, warlords coordinated through encrypted phone calls, resources extracted while populations starve. And all of it wrapped in enough deniability that the international community struggles to respond.